Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Here's a story told to me by a coworker who worked at the same summer camp I did. As far as my knowledge goes, these stories are completely true. These stories all take place around Mount St. Helens and Spirit Lake in Washington state. Old native legends talk about a demon that lives near, in the water in Washington called Siyatko. Siyatko was one of 3 demons who terrorized the land of men. One of the other 2 was named Siyatko, and was killed many years ago. I never learned the name of the 3rd demon from my coworker. We'll call my coworker Joe. When Joe was 11 years old, he was with his parents at Mount St. Helens and was on a tour when he got separated. He wandered around for a while until he realized he was completely lost. Being an outdoorsy child, he had a compass with him and knew which direction the tour started, ended in, and started to make his way in that direction. A little time passed, and as he was walking, a light fog started to roll in. As time went on, the fog got thicker and thicker until he could no longer make out his feet on the ground or his hands in front of his face. All of a sudden he saw a clearing in the fog, and in front of him lay the bank of Spirit Lake. He had heard bad things about this lake, however, and started to back away when he saw something disturb the surface of the water. He's not sure what it was, but he remembers 3 distinct ripples across the surface of the water. He finally found his way to a service road and walked along it until he found a few rangers who drove him back to the tour base. His parents greeted him and asked why he hadn't responded when they'd called him. He never heard them call him, but they swore they saw him in some fog and called to him, but he did not respond. His mother said she had seen him just off the tour path, but he was near the shore of the lake, a good 11 to 13 miles away. Only 20 minutes after he was reunited with his parents, the rangers got a call saying that someone had just drowned in the lake. Joe was later told by a tribesman that the only reason he survived that day was because that other boy had died. Years pass. Joe is now 19 and is working with the United States Geological Service, taking pictures of the mountain and taking rock core samples. One summer afternoon, he's camping near the mountain with a larger group of people, and in this group are an older man and his 17-year-old son. Joe and the old man got to talking, and after Joe set up his camera to take pictures of the sunset every 30 seconds on a timer, he and the old man are having a conversation about what happened to Joe near the mountain when he was 11. Throughout this conversation, he hears a constant thunk noise. It's the 17-year-old brat throwing ninja stars at a tree trunk. Joe asked him to stop multiple times, and the old man also told him to stop, but the son did not listen. The sun had just fallen behind the mountain when the fire that had been roaring a few feet high went completely out. A few seconds pass and a screaming sound starts up. It sounds like it's miles away up the mountain, but with each second the scream gets closer. Joe described it as a mix between nails on a chalkboard, a rusted door opening, and a throaty growl of a wolf. The scream got closer and louder, and Joe noticed the closer the scream got, the tops of the trees would bend and bend until the scream came right up to the group's campsite, and all the trees around them were bent so the tops were perpendicular with the ground. The scream at this point seemed to come from all around them, and Joe realized that his ears heard no noise. The scream was now only in his mind, echoing around his head. Joe ran. He grabbed his camera and ran to his car, got in and took off. The scream followed him down the road, but he noticed the farther he got from the campsite, the quieter the scream got until he heard it no longer. He had a friend who lived in a nearby town and went to stay there for the night. When he arrived, his friend was glad to see him and almost let him in, but his mother stopped him. She screamed when she saw him and slammed the door in his face. She had native roots and was a very spiritual woman. After several attempts to get Joe to leave, She finally opened the door a crack and told him that he was surrounded with a negative energy and told him the only way he was ever setting foot inside her house was if she smudged him first. Smudging is something done involving a special herb being burned and rubbed on the body from head to foot to cleanse and purify someone. Finally, she let him in and asked him to tell her what happened. Once he was done recounting his tale, she told him that he must go back in the morning and revisit the site. So in the morning he returned to find the other campers rapidly packing up. The old man was just putting the last of his things in his car when Joe pulled up. The old man asked why in the world Joe would come back. Joe said he had only been scared, and that it must have been his imagination. The old man shook his head and called over his son who had been throwing the stars. He told him to show something to Joe, and he did. The son pulled off his shirt and turned around, and on his back were 3 deep gashes from his shoulders to his lower back. They were at least an inch thick each and perfectly cauterized. No living animal has claws that big or that can cauterize a wound. Joe quickly collected all his things that he had left at the campsite and left. About a week later, the United States Geological Service asked for the pictures of the sunset he took that night, and when he developed the photos he found something that scared the living daylights out of him. 3 pictures, all taken within 90 seconds. The first one shows the fire at full blaze with the mountain in the background. The second shows the fire completely out with a large black shape silhouetted against the dark gray of the rest of the photo. The third shows the fire ablaze again. And reflected in the firelight were 2 gigantic eyes and a huge jaw full of teeth. I've seen this photo, but I regret that I don't have copies. The third photo was also placed under infrared light to check for any falsification. Under that light 2 sets of 3 claws are clearly visible against the ground. Fast forward just 2 years. Joe still works for the United States Geological Service taking pictures around the mountain. Nothing eventful has happened since the incident 2 years prior. It's in the back of Joe's mind. He's asked to take pictures of the mountain again at night during an almost full moon. This is something he really enjoys doing, so he gladly accepts. He sets up his tent and readies his camera for the pictures. Around 10 p.m. he leaves his tent and walks around and takes pictures. He notices some weird fog over the lake, a thick blanket with an unusual tuft of fog near the middle. He knew this would make a fantastic picture, so he hikes toward the lake. He took 2 pictures when all of a sudden a very, very powerful wind started to blow, making it hard for him to stand. He estimated the wind speed to be about 70 miles per hour. He somehow manages to get back to his tent, and right when he gets to it, the wind dies. He climbs inside and readies himself for the night and falls asleep. Around 11 p.m. he wakes up in a cold sweat. He has goosebumps and every hair is standing on end, and as he watches, 3 little points appear on the wall of his tent pointing in, right at him. Slowly, they push until there are clear impressions of 3 giant claws. Suddenly they disappear. Joe is clearly frightened but assumes the worst is over. Then he hears the zipper of his tent slowly start to open. He jumped about 6 inches in the air and grabbed the inside zipper. He wrestled the invisible force for about 10 minutes until it finally stopped struggling against him and he was able to grab his padlock and lock the zipper shut. Assuming that that had to be the end of it, he climbed back into his sleeping bag and went to sleep. Around midnight he woke up again. An unnatural stillness had taken place and once again his hair was standing on end. In an instant the poles of his tent collapsed and he felt something huge and solid press down on him from above, cutting off his air supply. He blacked out from lack of oxygen and woke up the next day with the tent poles set back up. He went back to his friend's house and was once again smudged by the mother and asked to recount his tale. When he described the location of his tent, the mother clicked her tongue disapprovingly and shook her head. She told him that he had set up his tent near the mouth of the Norway-Sweden mine. The story of the Norway-Sweden mine was told to him by the woman, and he told it to me. When the mine was first started, it was a very successful copper mine and everything ran smoothly for a while. Then one day the miners didn't return home. 3 days passed without a single one of the miners being seen. The owner of the mine went to see what was going on and he was dumbfounded. All the machinery was running, but not a single miner was to be seen. He finally found all the miners in the very deepest portion of the mine. Every one of them was dead and stacked in neat piles. Word got out about a mass murderer, but no one was ever caught. Because the mine was so profitable, a new crew of miners was hired and the mine reopened. Everything went well for 2 weeks until again all the miners didn't return home. The owner went to investigate for a second time and again found all the machinery running and all the miners dead in piles deep in the mine. This time they had all been beheaded, with the heads nowhere to be seen. But once again money ruled and a third group of miners was hired. Only 1 week passed before they didn't return home. The machinery had all been left on and running, but now there were deep gashes and scratches all around the mine in sets of 3. The miners were found completely dismembered. Every limb pulled apart and once again every head missing. The mine was then shut down for good. Joe has never returned to the mountain. But he has visited several reservations and asked about the demon Siyatko. Some tribes kicked him out for just speaking the name, for saying the name near large bodies of water is said to draw the spirit near. Other groups told him more stories of Siyatko, of which he has 57, and I can't for the life of me remember them well enough to recount them. Siyatko has been described as an enormous being with big red eyes, a giant mouth full of teeth bigger than arrowheads, and 2 long arms ending in a hand with 3 long, sharp, and monstrous claws. These stories were told to me by Joe at the camp we worked at together this summer. The camp is on an island, completely surrounded by water, but he swore we were far enough from the mountain to be safe saying the name Siyatko. 2 nights after being told these stories for the first time, I was on an overnight at the Heaven campsite at the camp. Overnights are a night where the kids sleep and eat and cook outside for a night instead of being in a cabin. The Heaven campsite was not named for a religious affiliation. After the kids went to bed, me and the 2 other staff members put the fire out completely and went to sleep. I woke up a few hours later and saw someone silhouetted against the now roaring fire. I assumed it was one of the other staff members and went back to sleep. In the morning I asked the other 2 and they saw the same thing at some point during the night, but both had assumed, like me, that it was a staff member who had lit the fire. None of the wood we brought was used for the fire, and there were marks in the ashes that hadn't been there the night before. 6 lines in the ashes, in sets of 3, a few feet apart. The campsite is at least a mile from the main camp, 3 miles from the next closest settlement, and lies directly overlooking the sea. We told our camp director and an investigation was made. No trace of another human being other than the 3 staff and 13 campers was found. That campsite was off limits for the rest of the summer. And that is the end of my story.
Demon tries to assault him in a tent where no one can hear him scream. The worst is over, back to sleep.
He's a pretty unusual guy. He ate foxglove when he was 9 and spent like 4 months in the hospital.
Nice story OP. Being from Seattle myself, it sounds believable. It's just a shame I can't find references to the spirit or the mine like anywhere I try to look it up.
There are websites on the mining history of that region and they'll verify the existence of the mine, but will cite different reasons for its closing. I assume to keep people from flipping shit a cover story was spread. As for the spirit, he's very feared and just speaking about him is supposed to draw his energy, so I doubt any natives would post anything about it, and they don't really tell the story to outsiders. Joe only found out the name because he had had contact with it. I don't know, that's the story he told me. I simultaneously do and don't want it to be true.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.